She had the mansion. She had the diamonds. She had a husband whose name made grown men flinch. For 6 years, Serena Whitmore stood beside Roman DeLuca and called it a life. But on the night she reached for his arm in a room full of the city's most powerful people, the night she needed him most, he looked at her like she was nothing. 4 words. That's all it took. Never touch me publicly. And just like that, something inside her went very, very quiet. If you've ever loved someone who made you feel invisible, stay with me. Like this video, drop a comment with the city you're watching from, and follow along to the end. Let's see how far this story travels. The ballroom smelled like old money and fresh lies. Serena noticed it the moment the elevator doors opened onto the 42nd floor of the Harrington Grand. That particular combination of expensive cologne, catered salmon, and the kind of polished laughter that had nothing genuine behind it. 300 people packed into a space designed to make 300 people feel important, and every single one of them was working at it. Working the room, working their angles, working the version of themselves they decided to present tonight. She stood at the threshold for a moment longer than she should have, long enough that the couple behind her had to step around her with polite, irritated smiles. Her dress was a deep burgundy silk that had cost more than most people's monthly rent, and her hair was pinned up in a way that her stylist had spent 40 minutes achieving and called effortless. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to look like, the wife of Roman DeLuca. That was the whole job, really. Look the part. Don't embarrass him. Smile when smiled at. Remember names. Forget things she wasn't supposed to know. She was very good at all of it. A waiter materialized at her elbow with a tray of champagne flutes, and Serena took one without thinking, wrapping her fingers around the stem the way you grip something when you need to feel grounded. The bubbles rose in thin, perfect columns. She watched them for a second, then looked up and scanned the room the way Roman had taught her. Not obviously, not like you're searching, but with a kind of practiced, unhurried awareness, the way a chess player looks at a board. She found him in under 4 seconds. Roman DeLuca was standing near the far wall beside a floor-to-ceiling window that framed the city skyline like a painting he'd commissioned. He was in a black tuxedo that his tailor had sent to the penthouse that morning, and he wore it the way he wore everything, with the complete indifference of a man who knew he didn't need clothes to command attention. He was 41 years old, broad through the shoulders, with dark hair threaded through with the first hints of gray at the temples that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than less. His jaw was set in that particular way it got at these events, that slight tension just below the ear that nobody else would have noticed. Serena noticed. She'd had 6 years to learn the landscape of his face. I was talking to 2 men she recognized. Senator Graves from the Western District, who owed Roman 3 election cycles worth of favors, and a real estate developer named Harmon Cruz, who'd gotten very rich very fast and was very eager for everyone to believe he'd earned it. Roman was nodding at something Graves had said, not because he agreed, but because he'd decided to let the man feel heard. That was another thing she'd learned about her husband. The nod wasn't agreement. The nod was calculation. She crossed the room toward him, navigating the clusters of guests with the muscle memory of a woman who'd done this 100 times. A city councilwoman touched her arm and said something about the auction later. Serena smiled, said something warm and noncommittal back, kept moving. A man whose name she genuinely couldn't recall shook her hand and told her she looked lovely, and she thanked him like she meant it. Roman saw her coming when she was still 20 feet away. She knew because the angle of his shoulders shifted fractionally, the way they always did when he was aware of something entering his orbit. He didn't look directly at her. He just knew. She reached the edge of the conversation and slid in with a smile directed at Graves and Cruz. Not Roman. She knew better than to demand his attention in front of people. And Graves immediately pivoted to include her with the enthusiasm of a man trying very hard to seem like he liked women. Mrs. DeLuca, what a pleasure. You look stunning, as always. Thank you, Senator. How's Margaret? Oh, wonderful, wonderful. He said it the way people say fine when they mean, I have no idea. And Serena let it pass because that wasn't the part of his life she needed to know about. Harmon Cruz launched into something about a new development going up on the east waterfront, and she listened with genuine seeming interest while her champagne got warm in her hand, and the string quartet in the corner worked through something melancholy that nobody was paying attention to. At some point, her shoulder brushed Roman's arm. Not intentionally. The knot of conversation had drawn them subtly together, the way people in close proximity drift, and her shoulder touched the fabric of his jacket for maybe 2 seconds. His expression didn't change. Not one muscle. but she felt him go still in that particular way. The way a very controlled person goes still when something has violated a boundary they set so long ago it's become architectural. She moved a half step away, refocused on what Cruz was saying, and told herself it didn't mean anything. It meant nothing. It was an accident of proximity, not a rejection. She was not going to read into it in the middle of a fundraiser at the Harrington Grand in front of a senator and a real estate developer who was almost certainly laundering money. She was very good at telling herself things didn't mean what they meant. The evening moved the way these evenings always moved, in slow, expensive circles. Dinner was served at tables arranged around a small stage where the Foundation's director gave a speech about childhood literacy that was genuinely good, actually moving, and Serena found herself listening rather than performing listening, which was a distinction she'd gotten very skilled at managing. She was seated beside a woman named Patricia Alderton, who ran a chain of private schools and had opinions about curriculum that were worth hearing, and for 45 minutes Serena had something close to a real conversation and felt something close to awake. Roman was 4 seats down on the same side of the table, which meant she could see the back of his head and the occasional profile when he turned to address someone. He ate with the controlled efficiency of a man who'd never learned to enjoy food at a table. Too much of his early life had been about eating fast or not eating at all. She knew that. She'd absorbed that from the fragments he'd let fall over the years. And he accepted the wine but barely touched it. She watched him without meaning to. That was another thing she'd spent 6 years learning, not to watch him. Because watching him made her want things from him, and wanting things from him was how you ended up standing in the bathroom at 2 in the morning trying to figure out what you'd done wrong. The auction started after dessert. Roman bought a piece of art he would never look at and a fishing trip to Alaska he would never take, both with the brisk efficiency of a man managing a spreadsheet. The bids went to 6 figures without him registering anything on his face. The woman running the auction, bright, loud, funny, in a way that worked the room expertly, made a joke about his poker face, and the room laughed and Roman smiled the smile he deployed in public, the one that lived on the surface of his face and stopped at his eyes. Serena laughed too. She hated how well she knew that smile. The auction wound down and the room decomposed into smaller clusters again. The string quartet elevated to something with a beat, and a few of the younger couples drifted toward an area that had been cleared for dancing. Serena stood at the edge of the room with a fresh glass of champagne she didn't want and watched a couple she didn't know sway together near the window. The woman had her head against the man's shoulder. His hand was at the small of her back. Nothing dramatic, nothing performative, just 2 people who were, in some fundamental way, glad to be standing next to each other. Serena looked away. She found the balcony doors. They were partially open, and beyond them was a narrow terrace that ran the length of the building's north face, lit by the ambient glow of the city and a line of small lanterns along the railing. 2 other guests were out there but moved inside as she stepped through, and then she was alone with the wind off the buildings and the sound of the city 42 floors below, and she let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding since the elevator. She set her champagne on the railing and gripped the cold metal with both hands and looked at the skyline. It was a genuinely beautiful city. She'd always thought so. She'd come here at 22 with a graduate school acceptance letter and an assumption that her life was going to look a certain way, and it had looked a certain way, just not the way she'd assumed. The city was the same, the skyline was the same, the lights going on in the office buildings across the way, people working late or just leaving their lights on, the red and white rivers of traffic on the streets below, the bridges spanning dark water. It was all there. Still there. She just couldn't feel it the way she used to. She was standing like that, trying to locate what was missing inside herself, when she heard the balcony door open behind her. She knew his step before she turned. Roman moved to the railing about 3 feet away from her, not looking at her, looking at the city. He'd lost the jacket somewhere inside, his sleeves rolled to the elbows in a gesture of informality that was as much as she ever got from him in public, and he had a glass of scotch in one hand that he held loose at his side. "You've been out here 15 minutes, he said. It wasn't a question or a concern. It was information, delivered neutrally, the way he delivered most things. "I needed some air." He said nothing. She looked at his profile, the strong line of his nose, the set of his jaw, the way he was looking at the city with the expression of a man doing inventory on something he owned, which, Serena supposed, was not entirely inaccurate. Roman DeLuca had interests in this city that would take a forensic accountant 2 years to fully map. and he was constitutionally incapable of looking at anything without thinking about leverage. She didn't know why she did what she did next. She'd analyze it later, lying in the dark, and she still wouldn't have a clean answer. Maybe it was the couple she'd watched through the window. Maybe it was the genuine conversation with Patricia Alderton that had reminded her what it felt like to be present in her own life. Maybe it was 42 floors of city below her and the cold metal railing under her hands and the exhaustion of performing for 3 hours straight. Or maybe it was something simpler. Maybe she was just tired and he was standing 3 feet away and they had been married for 6 years and she wanted, for 30 seconds, to feel like that meant something. She reached over and touched his arm. Just that. Her hand on his forearm, light, brief. The kind of touch that says, "I'm here," rather than anything more complicated than that. Roman looked down at her hand. Then he looked at her. His voice was quiet, controlled, and absolute. "Never touch me in public." The words hit her somewhere below the sternum, in the part of the body where you keep the things you can't explain to anyone. She pulled her hand back. She kept her face exactly still, because she'd had years of practice keeping her face exactly still, and she picked up her champagne glass and took a sip and looked back at the city. Roman finished his scotch in silence. He went back inside. Serena stayed on the balcony for another 10 minutes, until she was sure her face was doing what she needed it to do. And then she went back in too. She smiled at 3 more people before the evening ended. She could not have told you what any of them said. The car ride home was 22 minutes. She knew because she watched the clock on the dashboard with the focused attention of a person who needs a number to hold on to. The driver, Paolo, who had been Roman's driver for 11 years, and whose entire professional ethos seemed to be the elimination of his own personality, navigated the late-night streets with silent precision. Roman sat beside her going through something on his phone. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and watched the city go by and didn't say a word. The mansion was in the northern part of the city, set back from the road behind gates and mature trees that blocked the sightlines from the street. It was objectively a beautiful house, 12,000 square feet of stone and glass and carefully considered architecture, with a kitchen that had been featured in a design magazine and a garden that a full-time groundskeeper maintained to a standard Serena had never asked for. She had lived in it for 5 years, and she could tell you the exact number of steps between the master bedroom and the bathroom at 3 in the morning. But she had stopped being able to tell you what she felt when the gate swung open and the car pulled up the drive. She got out before Paolo had fully stopped. She heard Roman say something brief and quiet to him, instructions probably, some early morning arrangement. And then the front door was in front of her and she pressed in the code and went inside. The house was very quiet. That was always the first thing, the quiet. Not peaceful quiet, not the quiet of a place where people had lived and rested, but the other kind, the kind that has an edge to it, that says this is a space where sound has learned not to linger. The housekeeper had left hours ago. The cook left at 9. The security staff were outside or in their separate quarters. Inside, there was only the low hum of climate control and the faint sound of Serena's heels on marble until she reached the carpet on the stairs. She went to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed and did not turn on the light. Roman came in 7 minutes later. She could tell by the sound of his movements in the dressing room that he wasn't going to say anything. Not about the balcony, not about any of it. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man completing a sequence of actions. And when he came out and got into bed on his side, there was the darkness and the sound of his breathing, and the 6 inches of space between them that had been there so long it had its own gravity. Serena lay on her back and stared at the ceiling. Never touch me in public. She turned it over in her mind the way you turn something over when you're trying to find the angle that makes it mean something different than it means. She had done this with his words before. Done it countless times, found the charitable reading, the reasonable explanation, the context that made it less than what it was. He was under pressure. He didn't like public displays of affection. He had spent his entire adult life building a persona of iron control, and her touching his arm in front of people chipped at that. And maybe that was reasonable. Maybe that was just how he was built, and she had always known how he was built. But it was 4 in the morning now, in the dark, and she was very tired. And the truth, the real truth, the one she'd been managing for a long time, was that it wasn't about the balcony. It wasn't even about public displays of affection. It was about the fact that she had reached for him, for warmth, for 30 seconds of being someone's person rather than someone's projection, and he had shut it down with the reflexive authority of a man who had never, in 6 years, led her close enough to matter. She had been lonely for 6 years. She had been lonely in a 12,000 square foot house with a full staff and a car service, and more financial security than she could spend in 10 lifetimes. And she had managed it and minimized it and found the version of the story that made it okay. And tonight, she lay in the dark beside a man who was already asleep, and she could not find the version of the story that made it okay anymore. She got up at 4:47. She didn't turn on the light. She moved to the window and stood there in the dark, looking at the grounds, the manicured lawn, the security perimeter, the high stone wall at the property's edge. The garden looked different at night, stripped of its daytime order, just shapes and shadows. Beyond the wall, she couldn't see the city. She couldn't see anything beyond the boundary of this place. She stood there for a long time. Then she went to the closet that was hers, large enough to contain a life, which it did, and she found a bag. Not the luggage. Not the matched set of cream-colored hard-shell cases that had traveled with them to Geneva and Tokyo, and twice to the Amalfi Coast. Just a bag. A canvas duffel she'd had since graduate school that had lived on a high shelf because she hadn't needed it, and hadn't thrown it out either. She packed the way you pack when you've already decided something, and you're just moving through the physical steps of a decision that's been made somewhere below consciousness for a very long time. 2 pairs of jeans, some shirts, a sweater. Her laptop, the personal one, not the one Roman's IT guy had set up for her. Her passport, which she kept in her own drawer. A photograph that had been in her nightstand for 6 years of her and her college roommate at their graduation, both of them squinting into the sun and laughing at something off camera. She didn't take the jewelry. She didn't take the cards. She took the cash from the emergency envelope she'd kept in the back of her underwear drawer because she was, at her core, a woman who planned for contingencies even when she told herself she'd never use the plan. She wrote nothing down. There was nothing to say that he would understand yet. She picked up the bag and went down the stairs and through the kitchen and out the side entrance that opened near the garden. The one the security cameras covered least thoroughly, not because she'd ever planned to use it, but because she noticed everything. And she walked to the gate at the property's east corner that opened manually from the inside. She stood at the gate for a moment with her hand on the latch. The street was quiet. A few lights and windows across the way. The sound of a car several blocks over. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic. Just a street at nearly 5 in the morning, still and ordinary. She opened the gate and walked through. She didn't look back at the house. She had looked back enough. She kept walking. 3 blocks from the property, she found a 24-hour diner with a payphone in the lobby and a cracked vinyl booth that was empty, and she slid into it and ordered coffee from a woman who looked at her with the mild and curious assessment of someone who'd seen every kind of person come through a door in the small hours and didn't ask any questions. The coffee was bad and very hot, and Serena held the mug with both hands and felt her heartbeat slowly returning to something she recognized. She had $4,600 in the envelope. She had her passport. She had the phone with $200 left on a prepaid SIM she'd bought 6 months ago for a reason she'd told herself she couldn't remember. She knew one person she could call who wouldn't immediately call Roman. She pulled out the phone and stared at the number. Her hands were not shaking. She noticed that with some surprise. She had left the most fortified life she knew, in the dark, with a canvas duffel and $4,600, and her hands were not shaking. They were steady on the mug. They were steady on the phone. Whatever she had expected to feel, terror, doubt, the gravity of that house pulling at her to go back, she felt none of it. She felt for the first time in a very long time like herself. She dialed. It rang twice. Serena? The voice on the other end was her college friend Nadia, groggy but sharpening fast in the way Nadia always sharpened when she heard something in a voice she needed to respond to. What? It's 5 in the morning. Are you okay? I need a place to stay, Serena said. Just for a few days, maybe longer. A pause. Not the pause of someone calculating whether to help, but the pause of someone shifting into gear. I'll leave the key under the planter by the door. Building code is 4721. Nadia, come whenever. I'll have the couch made up by the time you get here. Serena exhaled. Thank you. She finished the coffee. She paid in cash. She walked out into the very beginning of morning, the sky still dark, but with that particular quality of darkness that precedes light, that says something is coming whether you're ready or not. And she got into a cab and gave the driver Nadia's address and sat in the back with the canvas duffel on her lap. She did not think about what Roman would find when he woke up, and she wasn't there. She did not think about the 12,000 square foot house, or the matched luggage, or the life she had built around a man who looked through her more than he'd ever looked at her. She watched the city go past the cab window, the first delivery trucks, the early workers, the lights coming on in bakeries and coffee shops, all that ordinary human machinery beginning its daily motion, and she felt the strange, vertiginous sensation of a person stepping off solid ground and discovering, with some shock, that they can swim. She was 34 years old. She had $4,600 and a graduate degree, and a friend with a couch, and a phone with a prepaid SIM. She had, for the first time in 6 years, nothing to perform and no one watching. The cab stopped at a light, and the first gray-pink light of dawn appeared at the edge of the skyline, and Serena pressed her palm flat against the cold window glass and felt it there, the city, actual and solid, on the other side of the barrier. She thought, I am still here. She thought, I am still here, and I don't know what that means yet, but it means something. The light changed. The cab moved. The city woke up around her, and 3 miles away, in a 12,000 square foot house behind high stone walls, Roman DeLuca slept on his side of a bed that had been two people's for 6 years, one hand flat on the mattress beside him, the space where she had been already cooling, and he did not wake up for another hour. When he did, he reached for her without thinking. His hand found nothing. He lay there in the gray morning light, hand on empty sheet, and stared at the ceiling with an expression that hadn't visited his face in a very long time. Not anger, not calculation, not the iron composure he'd spent decades engineering. Something quieter than all of that. Something that looked, to anyone who might have been watching, very much like fear. He sat up. He checked his phone. No message, no call. I went to the dressing room, then to the bathroom, then back to the bedroom, moving through the spaces the way you move when you're looking for confirmation of something you already know. The canvas duffel was gone. The cash envelope was gone. Her passport drawer was open and empty. The photograph was gone from her nightstand. Roman stood in the middle of the bedroom in the gray light with his phone in his hand, and for a full 30 seconds, he did not move. I was a man who had planned for most things. He had contingencies for contingencies. He had spent his entire adult life in a world where everything, loyalty, leverage, safety, was a variable to be managed, and he had become very good at managing variables. He had not planned for the canvas duffel. He had not planned for the passport and the cash and the missing photograph. He had not planned for the specific weight of the silence that had settled into the room in her absence. Not the usual silence, not the managed quiet of an efficient house, but something more total than that. Something that said, what you were relying on, without knowing you were relying on it, is gone, and you need to understand what that means. His thumb hovered over her contact. He put the phone down. He walked to the window and stood there looking at his grounds. The wall, the trees, the gate at the east corner that was not quite latched all the way back. And something moved in his chest that he had no word for because he'd spent 41 years making sure he never needed a word for it. Outside the city was fully waking up now. Traffic building, world running, everything proceeding on schedule, everything except this. He thought, she'll come back. He thought, she always comes back. He stood at the window for a long time. He almost believed it. What Serena didn't know, what she couldn't have known when she walked out through that east gate in the dark, was that her departure had activated something she had no part in, no awareness of, no control over, a carefully constructed web of alliances and obligations that Roman had built around their marriage like a secondary fortress, alliances that would not quietly accept the appearance of a crack in DeLuca's walls, not with the Navarro consolidation 3 weeks out and enemies watching every move he made. The message came to Roman's phone at 7:43 that morning. One line, no sender name, just, they've seen the empty car. Roman read it once. He read it again, and for the first time in 6 years, the man who had never once run toward anything ran his hand across his jaw, looked at his phone, looked at the east gate, looked at the ceiling, and understood that the worst thing he had ever done was not the things anyone would expect from a man in his position. The worst thing he had ever done was make someone love him enough to stay, and then give her not a single reason to. The message sat on Roman's phone for 11 minutes before he responded to it. Not because he didn't know what to say. Roman DeLuca always knew what to say. That was the thing about him, the thing that had kept him alive and functional in a world that consumed men who hesitated. He knew what to say and when to say it, and precisely how much weight to put behind each word. Language, for him, was a tool the same way a blade was a tool. You kept it sharp, you used it clean, you didn't wave it around. The 11 minutes were about something else. They were about the east gate that hadn't been fully latched, about the empty drawer, about the specific way his hand had found cold mattress that morning, and how that sensation had traveled up his arm and landed somewhere in his chest, and was still sitting there, 7 hours later, like a stone he couldn't locate well enough to remove. He typed back 2 words, handle it. Then he put the phone in his jacket pocket and walked downstairs to the kitchen where his housekeeper, Mrs. Alvarez, was moving through her morning routine with the determined efficiency of a woman who'd worked for him long enough to understand that her job required absolute incuriosity about anything that wasn't floors and groceries. She did not ask where Serena was. She would not ask. That was why she'd lasted 8 years. Roman poured his own coffee, which he never did. There was always someone to pour it, and stood at the kitchen island and drank it black and stared at the garden through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The grounds looked ordinary in the daylight, professional. The lawn freshly cut, the hedges shaped, the stone path leading to the garden gate swept clean. You would never look at it and see what it was, a perimeter, a controlled space, a life arranged so thoroughly that there was no room inside it for anything that hadn't been deliberately placed there. He thought about calling her. He decided against it. Not because he didn't want to. That was the thing he wasn't examining yet, the thing he put in the same drawer he'd been putting things in for years. But because calling her now meant acknowledging something he wasn't ready to acknowledge, and Roman DeLuca did not acknowledge things until he had decided exactly what to do about them first. He had a meeting at 9. He went to his meeting. Nadia's apartment was on the 4th floor of a building in the Westbrook neighborhood that smelled like old wood, and someone's cooking from 2 floors down, and it was exactly the size of the master bathroom in the DeLuca mansion. Serena had spent her first night on the pull-out couch beneath a quilt Nadia had owned since college, and woken up to morning light coming through curtains that didn't quite meet in the middle, and the sound of the city through a window that didn't have double-pane glass. She'd lain there for a while, just listening. Buses, someone's music, a dog. The building's pipes making the particular knock they make when a neighbor runs a shower. Ordinary sounds, immediate and unfiltered. Not the managed silence of a house that had been acoustically optimized for the comfort of one man. She felt again that strange stillness inside herself. Not happiness. She wasn't confused about that. It wasn't happiness. It was something more provisional than happiness. Something that felt like the first breath after a very long time underwater. It felt like, I am still a person. Nadia made eggs and strong coffee and did not ask a single question for the first 40 minutes, which was one of the things Serena had always loved about her, that she had the patience to let things arrive in their own time. They sat at the small kitchen table with their knees almost touching, because that's how small the kitchen was, and ate eggs and drank coffee, and Nadia talked about her job at the architecture firm and a problematic project manager named Desmond and the vacation she was planning to Portugal that kept getting deferred. Serena listened. She ate. She felt her shoulders do something they hadn't done in years, which was drop. You don't have to tell me anything, Nadia said eventually, pouring more coffee. But I'm going to say one thing and then I'll shut up. Okay. You look like you've been holding your breath for 6 years. She sat down. That's it. That's my thing. Serena looked at her coffee. Yeah, she said. Yeah, I think I have been. By day 3, Roman had not called. She checked the prepaid phone twice without meaning to, then put it face down on the bathroom counter and told herself it didn't matter. It didn't matter. She had not left to receive a call. She had not left to be retrieved. She had left because something inside her had finally and completely said no, and the absence of his call was not a wound. She would not let it be a wound. But the not calling was also, she understood with the clarity of someone no longer managing their own perceptions, entirely Roman. It was precisely him. He would not call because calling would mean conceding something, admitting some lack, and Roman had never in 41 years of life admitted to needing anything he didn't already have a plan to acquire. She knew that about him. She'd always known that about him. She had just spent 6 years believing it was something she could work around. On day 4, she called her bank. The personal account, the one he'd set up for her expenses, monthly transfers, automatic and impersonal as a utility payment, was still active. She withdrew 3,000 in cash because she had no idea what was coming, and cash was real. In a way, account balances weren't, and she stood at the ATM watching the bills come out and felt something harden in her that wasn't anger exactly, more like resolve. She needed to find work, not because of money. She had enough to manage for a while, but because she understood, standing there on the sidewalk with an envelope of cash and Nadia's apartment key in her pocket, that the most dangerous thing she could let happen was to become someone waiting. She had been waiting in various forms for 6 years. She was done with it. She went to a coffee shop with her laptop and spent 3 hours updating the resume she hadn't touched since before the marriage. She had a master's degree in education policy. She had spent 2 years before Roman doing consulting work for a district initiative that had produced measurable results. She had a whole professional self that had gone into storage when she became Mrs. DeLuca, and she went about the process of locating it with the focused, slightly grim efficiency of someone going through a storage unit. It was still there. That was what surprised her, or maybe what didn't surprise her, maybe what she'd needed to confirm. It was still there. All of it. She sent 6 applications before she closed the laptop. Roman's 9 o'clock meeting had been with his operations manager, a precise, humorless man named Carver, who had the effect of an accountant and the history of someone who'd made problems disappear with the same neutrality with which an accountant makes losses disappear. They'd sat in the study and talked for 2 hours about the Navarro consolidation, about the timeline, about the particular human obstacles that needed to be managed before the Eastern District came fully into alignment. Roman had been present for all of it. He had also been elsewhere, not visibly. If Carver noticed anything, and Carver noticed most things, he said nothing, which was also consistent with Carver's professional ethos. Roman asked the right questions. He made the right decisions. He'd been doing this long enough that a significant portion of it ran on a kind of operational autopilot, freeing up the part of his mind that was, currently, doing something he almost never permitted it to do. I was trying to remember the last time Serena had laughed. Not the laugh she used at events. He knew that one. He'd watched her deploy it 100 times, the warm social laugh that landed right and meant nothing. The other one. The one that came from somewhere real. He could remember it. It wasn't that long ago, was it? He tried to place it, tried to find a specific instance and couldn't get it into focus. A year ago? More? He was on his second cup of coffee when Carver said his name. DeLuca. What? I said the timeline on the Eastern Corridor. Does that work for you? Roman looked at him. Yes, it works. Carver studied him for 2 seconds longer than he usually studied anything, then wrote something down and moved on. That evening, Roman went to the study where he'd kept, since the early years, a bar cart with specific bottles for specific purposes. He poured 3 fingers of scotch and sat in the leather chair he'd owned for 15 years and looked at the room. It was a good room. Everything in it had been selected. Nothing in it was accidental. He'd spent years building a life in which nothing was accidental, because accidental was how things fell apart. And Roman had spent his entire existence in opposition to things falling apart. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Marcus. Marcus Vane was 45, Roman's oldest alliance, and, in the way these things worked, as close to a friend as Roman's world permitted. He answered. Tell me it's not what Carver thinks it is, Marcus said. No preamble. I don't know what Carver thinks. He thinks your wife left. Roman said nothing. Did she? She's not here. That's not what I asked. Roman set the glass down. What do you want, Marcus? I want to know if we have a problem. The Navarro meeting is in 3 weeks. If there's instability in your house, there is no instability. There's an empty seat at your table and word is already moving. These people watch everything, Roman. You know that. Perception is... I know what perception is. Then you know that a man whose wife walks out 3 weeks before a consolidation meeting looks like a man who's losing his grip. And a man who looks like he's losing his grip. Marcus. The word was flat, contained, the single word doing the work of several sentences. A pause. Fix it, Marcus said, quieter. Whatever it is, fix it. Roman hung up. He picked up the glass, put it down again without drinking, stood up and went to the window. Fix it. He'd spent his life fixing things. He was very good at fixing things. He understood, in some honest and uncomfortable part of himself, that he had made the fundamental error of treating his marriage as another thing to be managed, kept stable, kept functional, maintained within acceptable parameters, rather than as what it actually was, which was a person who had given him something he had never properly named and now taken it back. He called her. The call went to voicemail, not the voicemail he knew, her voice on the message, but a different one, generic, the automated voice of a carrier. The other phone, the one he didn't have a number for. He stood with the dead call in his hand for a long moment. Then he called Paolo and told him to bring the car. He had somewhere to be. Serena had been in the city 3 weeks when the letter came. Not a call, not a text. A letter, hand-delivered to Nadia's building, addressed to Serena in the formal script of a legal firm. She opened it at the kitchen table while Nadia made tea and didn't read over her shoulder. It was not divorce papers. It was a letter from Roman's attorney, careful and measured in the way attorneys are when they're trying to apply pressure while maintaining the appearance of neutrality, informing her that as a named party in various DeLuca family trusts and accounts, her extended absence from the marital residence created certain legal complications that required her prompt attention, and that Mr. DeLuca was prepared to discuss arrangements at her earliest convenience. Arrangements. She read the word twice. Not, I want you to come home. Not, I've been thinking about what happened on the balcony. Not any of the things she wasn't letting herself want, because she was very busy not letting herself want them. Arrangements. Bad? Nadia asked. Lawyers, Serena said. So, bad. She folded the letter and set it on the table. She picked up the tea. She looked at the middle distance and felt the particular anger that comes not from surprise but from confirmation. The anger that says, yes, of course, this is exactly what I knew it would be, and knowing doesn't make it not cut. He hadn't called her. He'd sent a lawyer. She was a legal complication. She picked up her personal phone and called an attorney she'd been speaking to casually for 2 weeks, a woman named Claire Dearden, who had a practice on the North Side and who had, in their first conversation, said, "Tell me what you want the outcome to be rather than tell me what happened," which was the first time anyone in a professional context had asked Serena what she wanted in a very long time. "I got the letter," Serena said. "I saw it," Claire said. "They're pushing. They want you reactive." "I'm not reactive." "I know. That's why we wait 3 days. Then we respond with a request for full financial disclosure as a precondition for any discussion. That puts them on the back foot." Serena was quiet for a moment. "He'll take it as escalation." "It is escalation, but it's justified and legal, and it tells them you have representation and you're not afraid." Claire paused. "Are you afraid?" Serena looked out the window. "No." "Good. Then let them be afraid for a while." She hung up and sat with the tea going cold, and felt the ground shifting beneath her in the specific way it shifts when something that had been theoretical becomes structural, when leaving becomes left, when the possibility of return quietly closes, not because anyone decides it, but because enough things happen to make it true. She thought about Roman reading Claire's response. She thought about his face, the controlled set of it, the way he'd look at her name on the legal letterhead. She thought about what it would take for that face to change, to move, to show something. And she sat with the fact that she didn't know. After 6 years, she didn't know. That was the thing. That was the whole thing. She had spent 6 years beside a man, and she did not know what it would take to reach him, and she had finally understood that not knowing was not a failure of her observation. She had observed plenty. She had paid very close attention. The problem was not her attention. The problem was that there was something inside Roman DeLuca that had never opened, and she had spent 6 years standing at a door that didn't have a handle on the inside. Roman got the response from Claire Dearden's office on a Thursday afternoon, and he read it standing at his desk, and the first thing he felt was not anger. That surprised him. He'd expected anger, the clean, functional anger that had always been his most reliable operating state, the kind that compressed things neatly and pointed at action. Instead, what moved through him was something slower, something that had more dimensions to it. She'd gotten an attorney. She'd filed for financial disclosure. She was 3 weeks out, and she hadn't called him once. And she'd gotten an attorney, and she was asking for full financial disclosure as a precondition. She wasn't coming back. He stood with the letter in his hand and let that reality settle through him the way cold water settles, and it moved through every floor of him and found things in each one, things he'd built rooms around, things he'd named other things, things he'd been very, very effective at not examining. He put the letter down. He picked up his phone. He called Marcus. "She filed," he said. A pause. "Formally?" "Attorney. Disclosure request. She's building a case. Christ, Roman. Don't. You need to..." I know what I need to do. He moved to the window. I'm going to go see her. That's... Marcus stopped. What do you mean you're going to go see her? You know where she is? Roman said nothing. You know where she is? I've always known where she is. The silence on the line had a texture to it. Marcus was recalibrating. He could hear it, running the same calculation Roman had been running for 3 weeks. The one about what it meant that a man who could find anyone at any time had chosen, for 3 weeks, not to close a distance of 4 miles. Why haven't you? Because I was waiting to know what to say. Another silence. Do you know now? Marcus asked. Roman looked at the window. No, he said, but I'm going anyway. He put on his jacket. He took the stairs rather than the elevator, which he almost never did, something about needing the seconds of movement, the concrete reality of his own body in a stairwell, before he did something he understood could not be undone. In the lobby, Paolo was waiting with the car. Roman got in. He gave Paolo the address. Paolo didn't react. Of course he didn't. Paolo drove. They moved through the city in the Thursday afternoon traffic, and Roman sat in the back and watched the streets go by. The neighborhood shifting, the architecture changing character, the city revealing its layers as they moved from the northern corridors into the mid-district and then toward Westbrook. He watched a woman pushing a stroller at a crosswalk. He watched a group of people in suits coming out of an office building, one of them laughing at something, all of them moving with the energy of a day that was almost done. He watched the city do what it always did, contain its millions of separate lives, each moving according to its own internal logic. And he thought about how long it had been since he'd thought of Serena as a person with an internal logic rather than a presence in his household. He didn't like the thought. He didn't push it away either. Paolo pulled onto Nadia's street. He stopped across from the building. Wait here, Roman said. He got out. He stood on the sidewalk in the afternoon light and looked up at the building's facade. Ordinary brick, 4 floors, a line of buzzers at the front entrance, 2 planters beside the door, one with dried flowers. Nothing about it that was designed to keep him out. No gates, no security, no perimeter, just a door. He looked up at the 4th floor windows. The light was on. He was halfway to the door when it opened, and Serena walked out. She had a bag over one shoulder, a bag he didn't recognize, and she was dressed simply, jeans and a dark coat, her hair loose in a way he almost never saw it. She was looking down at her phone, not at the street, and she took 2 steps before she looked up. She stopped. He stopped. They stood 10 feet apart on the sidewalk in the gray afternoon, the city moving around them with total indifference, and Roman watched something move across her face. Not surprise, she'd controlled past surprise. Something quieter. Something that looked, for a fraction of a second, like grief. Then it closed. Roman, she said. Not a question, not a welcome. Serena. She looked at him with the steady, level regard of someone who had spent 3 weeks rebuilding a particular kind of internal architecture, and he could see the structure of it, the careful way she'd put herself back together, the alignment of her, the quality of presence that was different from what he remembered. She seemed taller somehow, not literally, just more there than she had been in years. You can't be here, she said. I know. Then why are you? He held her gaze. Because I don't have anything to say yet, he said, and I came anyway. She looked at him for a long moment. A bus went past, close enough that they both felt the displaced air, and neither of them moved. That's not enough, she said. I know that too. Her jaw tightened fractionally. I'm meeting someone for a job interview. She shifted the bag on her shoulder. You need to go, Roman. He looked at her. The coat, the bag, the loose hair, the job interview. The life she was building 4 miles from his house with $4,600 and a college friend's couch and a lawyer who filed disclosure requests. She was standing in it right now, in the reality of what she'd chosen, and she was, he could see it plainly, already somewhere he couldn't easily reach. I'll go, he said. She waited. He didn't move. You're still standing there, she said. I know. Something flickered in her expression. Not softness, not quite, but a kind of recognition, like she was seeing something in him she'd looked for a long time and was not, at this particular moment, sure what to do with it. Go home, Roman, she said. Then she walked past him. He turned and watched her go. The straight line of her spine, the bag over her shoulder, the way she moved with a decisiveness that had not been there at the Harrington Grand 3 weeks ago. She turned right at the corner without looking back and disappeared. He stood on the sidewalk. Paolo was watching from the car, saying nothing. Roman stood there for another 30 seconds, then got back in the car. Neither of them spoke for 2 blocks. Then Paolo said, very quietly, "Home, sir?" Roman looked out the window. "No," he said. "Drive." Paolo drove. And in the back of the car, Roman DeLuca sat with his hands on his thighs and his jaw set, and something working its way through his chest that he still didn't have a name for. While 4 blocks away, Serena Whitmore walked into the offices of the Bright Horizons Education Foundation for an interview that would, though she didn't know it yet, change the entire shape of what came next, and send Roman spiraling toward the one confrontation he had been his whole life too controlled, too armored, and too afraid to have. The Bright Horizons Education Foundation occupied the 2nd and 3rd floors of a building on Callaway Street that had been a textile warehouse in a previous life, and you could still see the bones of that. The high ceilings, the wide plank floors worn smooth by decades of foot traffic, the industrial windows that let in light in long, specific rectangles that moved across the room as the afternoon progressed. Someone had put up whiteboards and filled them with numbers and program names and arrows connecting things. Someone had pinned children's drawings along one wall, crayon suns, lopsided houses, figures holding hands. And the drawings were not decorative, they were evidence. This is who we're doing this for. This is what it looks like. Serena sat in a chair across from Ethan Callaway and felt, for the 2nd time in a month, like herself. Ethan was 40, lean, with the kind of face that had more history in it than handsomeness. Not ugly, just lived in. The face of a man who spent his time thinking about things that mattered rather than managing how he appeared while thinking. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him with actual notes on it, handwritten, which meant he'd read her resume carefully enough to have questions, which meant he was taking this seriously, which meant she caught herself. She was cataloging evidence of basic professional respect as though it were remarkable. It was remarkable. That was the problem. "Your district initiative work," Ethan said, tapping the legal pad. "The retention numbers from your 2nd year. How'd you get there?" "Relationships," she said. "Not programming. Programming is what you do once people trust you enough to show up." He looked at her. Not through her, not past her, at her. With the focused attention of someone actually listening. Most people lead with the programming. Most people get frustrated when the programming doesn't stick and can't figure out why. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile exactly, more like a recognition. He wrote something down. The interview lasted an hour and 20 minutes. She hadn't prepared for an hour and 20 minutes. She'd prepared for 45, which was standard, which was polite, which was the amount of time a foundation director allocated to a candidate he was going through the motions on. An hour and 20 minutes meant something else. She drove back to Nadia's apartment with the windows down despite the cold and the city coming through the glass, and something in her chest that was cautious and alive at the same time. Her phone buzzed. Claire Dearden. "They responded to the disclosure request," Claire said. "Fast. Too fast. They're not complying. They're pushing back with a counterproposal. Full settlement offer. Lump sum, clean break, you walk away from the trusts, and they walk away from any claims on your prior assets." Serena turned onto Nadia's street. "What's the number?" Claire told her. It was a significant number. It was the kind of number that said, "We want this resolved, and we want it resolved without discovery." Which meant there was something in the discovery they didn't want her to find. "Don't take it," Serena said. "That's my recommendation too, but I want you to understand, if we push for full disclosure, they will make this difficult. These are people who have resources that most opposing counsel don't encounter. I know what resources they have." A beat. "Do you want to tell me what you think they're protecting?" Serena pulled into a parking space and sat with the engine running. She thought about 6 years of conversations she hadn't been allowed to finish, rooms she'd been gently redirected away from, phone calls that ended when she entered. She thought about the careful architecture of her ignorance, how deliberately it had been maintained. "Not yet," she said, "but ask for everything, every account, every entity, every transfer in the last 7 years, all of it." She hung up and sat in the car until the engine got cold. 3 weeks after the interview, Ethan called and offered her the position. Program Coordinator, Community Outreach Division. The salary was a fraction of what she'd been given monthly as Roman's wife. and she said yes before he'd finished the sentence. She found an apartment 2 weeks after that. Small, third floor, a building on Mercer Street with a fire escape that she decided immediately she would put a plant on. It had one bedroom and a kitchen with a window that looked at another building's brick wall. And it was hers in a way that the 12,000 square foot mansion had never been hers. And she stood in the empty living room on her first night there with takeout containers and a sleeping bag borrowed from Nadia and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Space, just space, her own. The foundation work was immediate and consuming in the best possible way. The kind of work that reached into you and pulled you forward rather than requiring constant internal justification. She was in the field 3 days a week. In community centers, in school libraries and after-school programs in neighborhoods, the city's power structure had been systematically underinvesting in for decades. She was meeting parents who were exhausted and scared and desperately wanted more for their children, and she was learning how to be useful to them in practical, specific ways that had nothing to do with writing a check. Ethan was a good director. He was clear about expectations, flexible about method, and he asked her opinion on things and then actually used her answers, which was she kept having to recalibrate how much that shouldn't be remarkable. The basic minimum of a professional relationship and also something she'd been starved of for years. They worked late some evenings, and they'd started getting coffee after in the Thai place 2 blocks from the office that was cheap and loud and nothing like any restaurant she'd been to in her previous life. They talked about work, mostly. The programs, the funding gaps, the particular bureaucratic walls they were trying to navigate. Sometimes they talked about other things. She told him about her graduate work, her early career, the consultant years that had felt like they were building towards something before they'd been interrupted. He told her about growing up in a mid-sized Rust Belt city where the school system had been the only thing standing between a lot of kids and nothing, which was why this was what he did. How was she understood a good person? Not uncomplicated. He had a temper that he kept well managed, but that surfaced in meetings when something bureaucratic was being deliberately obstructive. And he had the particular stubbornness of someone who'd chosen principle over pragmatism enough times to have real scar tissue from it. But good, genuinely. She was careful about what she felt. She had been through too much in the last few months to trust her own calibration. She knew she was in a specific kind of vulnerability, the particular openness that comes from having been closed for a long time, and she was not going to confuse proximity and decency for something more than they were. She was careful. She was also, beneath the careful, something she hadn't been in years, interested in her own life. The disclosure documents arrived on a Tuesday. Claire called at 7 in the morning, which was not when attorneys called unless something had happened. Serena was standing at her kitchen window with coffee, watching the brick wall across the way catch the early light, and she felt the call before she heard it, that particular anticipatory weight in her sternum. "I need you to come in," Claire said. "Tell me now." A pause that lasted long enough to mean, "I don't want to tell you over the phone." "Claire." The disclosure came through, partial. "They're still fighting some of it, but enough." Another pause. "Serena, there's an entity, a holding company, registered offshore, that has been making quarterly payments for the last 4 years to a family named Whitmore." The coffee mug was warm in her hands. She focused on that. "Which Whitmores?" she said very carefully. "Your parents' address is listed as the contact." She put the mug down. She set it down precisely, on the counter, and took her hands away from it and stood with her hands at her sides and felt the room do something. Rooms do when information reorganizes the entire structure of what you thought you knew. "How much?" she said. Claire told her. "Quarterly. For 4 years. Her parents' address. The holding company threaded through 3 shell entities before it resolved back to a DeLuca-controlled trust. "That's," she started. "It's substantial, yes." "That's not what I was going to say." She pressed her back against the counter. "That's why they introduced us." Silence on the line. "My parents introduced me to Roman at the Alderton event, 4 years before the payments started." She was saying it out loud as she assembled it, because saying it out loud was how she made sure she wasn't constructing something that wasn't there. But the payments started 4 years into the marriage, not before. So it wasn't a setup from the beginning. It was a transaction that developed after the relationship was established, Claire said quietly. Serena, I have to ask you, did you have any knowledge? No. Flat, immediate, total. No. I believe you, but this will come up if we... I know it will come up. I know. She was pacing now, 4 steps to the window, 4 steps back, the apartment suddenly very small. He paid my parents to keep me compliant. She heard herself say it. She said it again because the first time had felt like it might not be real. He paid my parents to keep me compliant. For 4 years. 4 years of holidays, of dinners, of my mother telling me to be patient, that this was how marriages worked, that Roman was a good man who provided. She stopped pacing, stood completely still. They knew. We don't know the exact nature of the arrangement. Don't do that. Don't be a lawyer right now. Her voice was not shaking. She needed it to not be shaking. They knew. Whatever he paid them for, they knew the shape of it, and they kept telling me to stay. She pressed her hand flat against the brick wall window and felt the glass, cold and real. What do you want me to do? Claire asked. I want you to file everything, every piece of it. I want the full scope of that holding company in the record. She lifted her hand from the glass. And I need today. I need. Don't file anything until tomorrow morning. I need today. She hung up. She stood in the kitchen for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called her mother. What? Her mother answered on the second ring, the way she always answered, with that particular brightness that Serena had spent 34 years reading as warmth, and was now, standing in her apartment on Mercer Street with Claire Dearden's words still arranged in her chest like shrapnel, reading as something else entirely. Serena, honey, we've been so worried, your father and I, you haven't. I know about the payments, Serena said. Silence. Not the silence of confusion. Not the silence of a person trying to understand what they'd just heard. The silence of a person who had been waiting for this call and had been hoping it would never come. I don't know what you. Mom, don't. Her voice was quiet, absolute, the kind of quiet that has nothing left to lose. I have the documents, the holding company, 4 years of quarterly deposits. I know. A breath on the line. Then another. Then the sound of a door closing. Her mother moving away from wherever her father was. She recognized the particular acoustics of the hallway in her parents' house, the slight echo. It wasn't like you're making it sound, her mother said, and her voice had dropped and changed, and the brightness was gone, and in its place was something Serena recognized but had never, until this moment, had reason to name accurately, guilt performing as defensiveness. Tell me what it was like. He came to us, early on. He said he wanted to make sure you were taken care of. He said he was worried about your independence, that you'd been talking about going back to work, and he wanted us to convince me not to. To help you see that what you had was, he paid you to manage me. She said it with the same precision she'd used on the window glass. No heat in it, just the exact shape of the thing. He paid you to make sure I stayed, and you took it. Serena, for 4 years, every time I called you unhappy, every time I said I was thinking about leaving, every time I asked you if you thought this was normal, if you thought it was okay, you told me to stay, and you were being paid. The sound on the line was her mother breathing, and Serena stood in her apartment and listened to it and felt something moving through her that was too large and too complicated for any single word, grief and rage, and the specific vertigo of a foundation shifting, the kind of shift that doesn't go back because you can't unknow the shape of the ground once you've seen what's beneath it. We thought we were protecting you, her mother said, very quietly. The world he's in, if you had just left, if you'd pushed him, we didn't know what he might. Stop. We were scared for you, Serena. You have to. I said stop. Not loud, not breaking, just done. Don't rewrite this as protection. You took the money, and you used it to keep me in a house where I was disappearing, and you called it love, and I believed you. Her mother said her name once more, low, cracked at the edges. Serena hung up. She sat down on the floor. Not dramatically, just down, her back against the cabinets, because her legs decided they were finished with the task of holding her upright, and the floor was right there. She sat on the cheap linoleum of her Mercer Street kitchen and put her hands on her knees and breathed in and out, and let the full scope of it move through her without trying to manage it. 6 years, not just Roman's control, not just his ice and his distance and his 4 words on a balcony, all of that had been real, and it had been enough. It had been more than enough, but it had also been the visible part, the part she could name, the part she'd been slowly building the courage to walk away from. Beneath it, invisible to her, Her own parents had been architecture. She sat on the floor for 20 minutes, then she got up. She washed her face. She changed her shirt. She made another cup of coffee that she didn't drink. She stood at the window and looked at the brick wall and thought, I'm still here, and I know the truth now, and I cannot unknow it. And that is actually something. That is not nothing. She was still standing there when her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't open it. She opened it. We need to talk, not about the lawyers, about what's coming. MV Marcus Vane. She stared at the text. She didn't have Marcus Vane's number, had never had it, had been kept deliberately away from that part of Roman's world, which meant he'd gotten her number through channels she didn't want to think too carefully about, which meant this was not casual, which meant something was happening that Roman had not told her about, and that Marcus Vane, who had spent 15 years being Roman's most trusted alliance, and who reached out to people only when something required managing, had decided she needed to know. She looked at the text for a long time. Then she typed back, when and where. The response came in under a minute. Tomorrow. The Meridian Cafe on 9th, 8 a.m. Come alone. She set the phone face down on the counter. She looked at the brick wall. She thought about Claire's documents and her mother's silence and Roman's face on the sidewalk outside Nadia's building. The look he'd had, the uncharacteristic rawness of it, a man standing in daylight without his armor for the first time she could remember. She thought, there is something I still don't know. And she thought, whatever it is going to cost me something I haven't already paid. She picked up the phone and looked at the text one more time. She did not cancel. The Meridian Cafe on 9th Street opened at 7, and by 8 had exactly the kind of crowd that made a private conversation possible. Enough noise, enough bodies, enough the city going about its business energy that two people talking in a corner booth were invisible. Serena arrived 7 minutes early. She got there early because she wanted to see him come in, wanted that small advantage of watching before being watched, and she sat with her hands around a coffee she'd ordered without tasting and kept her eyes on the door. Marcus Vane walked in at 8 exactly. She recognized him from the few events where their paths had crossed. Roman's world was careful about who touched whose orbit, but there had been 2 occasions, a dinner and a reception, where she'd seen Marcus at the periphery. He was not physically imposing the way Roman was. He was compact, 50s, with gray at his temples, and the kind of stillness that came not from peace, but from decades of practice at not telegraphing. He wore a dark coat, no tie, and he moved through the cafe the way people move through spaces when they've spent their lives reading rooms before entering them. He saw her immediately. Of course he did. He slid into the booth across from her without offering a hand, without the performance of greeting, and signaled the waitress for coffee with the minimal efficiency of a man who'd already spent his social energy budget getting here. You came, he said. You said it was important. It is. The coffee arrived. He wrapped both hands around it without drinking. How much do you know about the Navarro consolidation? She kept her face neutral. Roman's business isn't something he shared with me. I'm not asking what he told you. I'm asking what you know. His eyes on her were direct, not unkind, but without any softness. You lived in that house for 6 years. You're not unintelligent. What do you know? She held his gaze. I know it's a significant territorial consolidation in the Eastern District. I know it's been in negotiation for over a year. I know Roman considers it the most important structural move he's made in a decade. She paused. I know it was supposed to close 3 weeks ago and hasn't. Something moved in Marcus's expression, confirmation, and something that might have been respect. It hasn't closed, he said, because the Navarro side has a condition, a new condition, added 6 weeks ago after word got out that Roman's wife had left. He turned the coffee mug a quarter turn. They want a show of stability. Specifically, they want Roman to present at the closing with his marriage intact. Their principal is 73 years old and deeply traditional, and he has decided, based on whatever counsel he's receiving, that a man whose household is visibly fractured is a man whose word cannot be relied upon in a long-term alliance. Serena processed this. That's not my problem, she said. No, Marcus agreed. It's Roman's problem. The reason I'm sitting across from you at 8 in the morning is that Roman doesn't know I'm here. She went very still. He'd be furious if he knew, Marcus continued. He would consider it a betrayal of his autonomy, and he would be right to consider it that. But I've known Roman DeLuca for 20 years, and I have watched him make every kind of decision. Good ones, catastrophic ones, ones that looked catastrophic and turned out to be genius. And in 20 years, I have never seen him make a decision about you. He looked at her. He manages around you. He reacts to you. He sits in that house and stares at your side of the bed, and he will not call you because calling you means admitting something he doesn't have the language for yet. That's not decision-making. That's paralysis. And I am watching a very dangerous situation develop because one man is paralyzed. The cafe noise went on around them. Serena's coffee was getting cold. What dangerous situation, she said. Marcus turned the mug another quarter turn. There's a faction within the Navarro organization that doesn't want the consolidation. Younger, impatient, they have their own vision for the Eastern District, and it doesn't include an alliance with Roman. They've been using the delay as leverage, arguing to their principal that Roman is weak, that the instability in his house proves it, that they should pull the deal and move independently. He paused. If they pull the deal and move independently, they will move against Roman directly. And they will not move with lawyers. The word sat between them. She understood what it meant. She'd always understood, on some level, the nature of the world Roman operated in. She'd just been kept at sufficient remove that understanding remained theoretical. It was not theoretical now. It was a man sitting across from her in a cafe on 9th Street telling her that people who wished her estranged husband harm were using her absence as justification. You're telling me this is my fault, she said. No. Quick, firm. I'm telling you that a situation you didn't create and don't control is being shaped, in part, by your absence. That's different from fault. He finally drank some coffee. I'm also telling you that Roman would rather walk into whatever's coming alone than ask you for anything, because asking you means standing in front of you without the wall, and he doesn't know how to do that. He has never known how to do that. It's the one thing... Marcus stopped, set the mug down. It's the one thing I have watched cost him more than everything else combined, and I'm not sure he'll survive learning it the hard way this time. Serena sat with that. She thought about the sidewalk outside Nadia's building, the east gate not quite latched, the 4 words on the balcony, her mother's breathing on the phone, the cash envelope in the drawer she'd kept for a plan she'd told herself she'd never use. What are you asking me to do? She said. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm asking you to know the full picture. He held her gaze. What you do with it is yours. He left $40 on the table for 2 coffees and walked out without looking back. Serena sat alone in the booth for a long time. She called Claire from the sidewalk outside. Don't file today, she said. A pause. Serena, one more day, maybe 2. I need to think. The settlement window? I know the window. One more day, Claire. She hung up and walked. She walked for 40 minutes without a destination, through streets she'd been learning for months, through the neighborhoods that had become hers, in a way nothing in her previous life had been hers. And she let the full weight of it move through her as she walked, all of it, the compound pressure of Marcus's words, and her mother's silence, and Claire's documents, and 6 years of managed loneliness, and the new life she was building, and Ethan's steadiness, and the children's drawings on the foundation wall, and the fire escape with the plant she'd put on it, all of it. She stopped at a corner. She made a decision, not because of Marcus, not because of the Navarro consolidation, or the political geometry of Roman's world. She made it for a reason that had nothing to do with any of that, and everything to do with the person she was trying to become. A person who moved through her life with clear eyes and complete information, who didn't let other people manage the boundaries of what she knew and what she did about it. She needed to face Roman directly, not to go back, not to save his deal, not to perform the function Marcus had come to her door to request, but because there were things that needed to be said between them that had never been said, and she was not going to let lawyers and disclosure documents and the machinery of uncoupling do the work that 2 people who had spent 6 years in the same house owed each other directly. She pulled out her phone. She called him. It rang 3 times. 4. She was preparing for voicemail when he picked up. The silence on his end lasted 1 second, maybe 2. The silence of a man recalibrating to something he hadn't expected. Serena. We need to talk, she said. Not through lawyers, you and me, today. Another beat. Where? The Harrington. The bar on the lobby level. 6 o'clock. She hung up before he could respond. She was there at 5:55. She ordered water and sat at a table near the window that looked out onto the street rather than into the bar, because she wanted the option of watching the city if she needed to look away from him, and she sat with her back straight and her hands flat on the table and let herself feel the full specific weight of what she was about to walk into. She had her phone. She had Claire's number on speed dial. She had the documents. She also had, when she was honest with herself, something she didn't want to call hope, because hope was dangerous, but something in that neighborhood, the residue of 6 years, the specific gravity of a person you'd been close to, even when close had never been close enough. She saw the car pull up outside. She saw him get out. I was in a dark suit, no tie, and he walked through the lobby with that particular controlled velocity of his. Not hurrying, never hurrying, but moving through spaces the way current moves through water, with direction and force that didn't need to announce itself. She watched him find her through the bar's glass partition, watched his pace adjust by a fraction when he saw her face, watched him navigate the tables with his eyes on her the entire way. He sat down. He looked at her. She looked back. For a moment neither of them spoke, and the bar went on doing what bars do in the early evening. The low music, the conversations from other tables, the sound of glasses, the city visible through the window doing what cities do. All of it proceeding around them with complete indifference to the fact that something was ending in this particular spot tonight, or being said for the first time, or both. "You called me," he said. "I know about Marcus." His jaw tightened. He shouldn't have. He was right to. She held his gaze. Not about what he was asking, about the fact that you were paralyzed. That part he was right about. Roman said nothing. That particular nothing that wasn't absence. It was compression. Everything pushed down and held. "I didn't call you because of the Navarro deal," she said. "I need you to understand that. I am not here to save your consolidation. I'm here because I spent 6 years in a marriage where we never once had a conversation. We couldn't walk away from unchanged, and I'm not leaving this the same way." Something moved in his face. Not the social surface. Below it. "I know about the payments," she said. The compression in him changed character. She saw it. Not surprise, which would have been informative, but something more complicated than surprise. He knew she knew. She could see that. He had probably known the moment Claire filed the disclosure request. What she was reading in his face now was not the shock of exposure, but the specific expression of a man who has been waiting for an accounting he isn't sure he deserves to survive. "To my parents," she said, just to be complete. 4 years, quarterly, to keep me—" She stopped. "What was the exact arrangement, Roman? What did you pay them for?" He looked at the table for 1 second, then back at her. "Stability," he said. "That's a word. I paid them to—" He stopped. She watched him work through something, watched the struggle of a man who dealt in controlled language, trying to locate something more honest than controlled language. "I knew you were unhappy. I had known for a long time, and I didn't know how to fix it, and I didn't want to lose it, and your parents had influence over you that I—" He stopped again. "That you leveraged." "Yes." The word landed between them, clean and ugly. "So when my mother told me to be patient," Serena said, keeping her voice level, "when she told me Roman was a good provider and marriages took work, and I should stop looking for things that weren't realistic, she was being paid to say that. I didn't write her a script. You didn't have to. You paid her, and she understood what she was being paid for." She felt her hands, flat on the table, pressing down. "Do you understand what that cost me? Do you understand, not the marriage, not the years, but specifically the cost of having the people who were supposed to be—" She stopped, breathed. "You turned my own family into a wall I couldn't see." Roman sat with that. He didn't defend it. That was, she registered it. He didn't reach for justification or context or the version that made it something other than what it was. "I know," he said. "That's not enough." "I know that too." She looked at him. The barlight caught the gray at his temples. He looked tired in a way she hadn't seen before. Not the operational tiredness of a man running too many things, but something more essential than that. Something that went down to the root. "Why?" she said. "Not the payments. Before that. The balcony was just the last time. There were 100 times before the balcony. Every time I reached for you and you made me feel like I was asking for something embarrassing. Why?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "Because I didn't trust it," he said finally. "Trust what? Any of it. What you—" He moved his jaw. "What you felt. For me. I couldn't—" He stopped and she could see it physically. The effort of this. the work of a man dismantling with bare hands a structure he'd spent his whole life building. I've spent my entire life in a world where people want things from me. Position, protection, money, access. Everyone who has ever gotten close to me has wanted something from proximity to me. And I understand that world. I know how to operate in that world. What I don't know how to... His voice stopped. He pressed his jaw closed and looked at the window, at the city, then back at her. What I don't know how to do is believe that someone just wants me. The bar went on around them. Serena sat with his words. She thought about 6 years of watching him be competent and controlled and always slightly behind glass. She thought about the fundamental loneliness of a person who'd grown so defended against being wanted for the wrong reasons that they'd made themselves unreachable to anyone wanting them for the right ones. She thought about how much she'd needed to hear this, and how too late it was, and how those two things could both be completely true. I did want you, she said, for a long time, just you. She held his gaze. And you made me feel like wanting you was something to be ashamed of. His face did something she'd never seen it do. It broke. Not dramatically. Roman DeLuca didn't have dramatic breaks. He wasn't built for them. It was subtle and total. A small collapse around the eyes, a tension leaving the jaw. The look of a man whose last line of defense had just been stood down, not by force, but by simple truth delivered in a quiet voice. I know, he said. The third time. Different each time. This time it had nothing defensive in it. Nothing managing. Just the sound of a person who understood, maybe for the first time, the full weight of what they'd done and was not going to pretend otherwise. They sat in silence. Outside, the city went on. A bus. A group of laughing people. The lights of the building across the way coming on floor by floor as the evening advanced. I'm not coming back, Serena said. He nodded. Once. She could see that he'd known it. That somewhere in the last months he'd moved past the phase of believing she would return and into something harder and more honest. The Navarro deal is not my concern, she said, but I'll tell you this, handle your own house, not because of the optics, because you've been using business as a reason to not look at yourself for 20 years, and it's the most expensive habit you have. He looked at her. How did you? Because I watched you do it. She picked up her water glass, put it down. Every time something got difficult between us, you had a crisis that needed managing. Every time I needed something from you, there was an operation, a meeting, a situation. The business was always there, Roman, right on time, every time. He sat with that. She watched him sit with it, watched him not argue, not deflect, not reach for the version that made it something other than what it was. She watched a man who had spent his entire professional life never being caught flat-footed, sit completely still in a bar on a Tuesday evening and absorb the truth about himself from the woman he'd failed, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not love? Not anymore. Or not only that, something closer to sorrow. The particular sorrow that exists for things that could have been different and weren't. I never stopped, he started. Don't. She held up a hand, not harshly, just steady. Don't tell me that right now. It's not what this conversation is for. He closed his mouth. She picked up her bag. She stood. He stood too, automatically, the ingrained reflex of a man who'd been raised with certain social architectures regardless of everything else. And they stood on opposite sides of the table and looked at each other in the bar light while the city moved outside the window. Get a therapist, she said. Not a fixer, not a strategist, someone who will make you look at the actual thing. He almost made the face he made when people suggested things he considered irrelevant to him. He didn't make the face. Okay, he said. She looked at him for one more moment. This man she had loved and lost and been managed by and been damaged by and was, she understood now, not destroyed by, not even close. And she turned toward the door. She had taken 2 steps when his voice came from behind her. Serena. She stopped. Didn't turn. I'm sorry. A pause. Not as an argument. Not to change anything. She heard him exhale. I needed to say it directly, to you, not through attorneys. She stood with her back to him. She stood there for 3 seconds. Then she said quietly, I know. She walked out. The lobby doors opened onto the street and the evening air hit her face and she kept walking and did not look at the car. She knew was parked at the curb, did not look at Paolo standing beside it, did not look back at the glass facade of the Harrington Grand reflecting the city back at itself. She walked half a block and stopped at a corner and pressed her hand against a lamppost and stood there, breathing, just breathing, in and out, the air cold and real in her lungs, the city going on around her in every direction, the whole dense, ongoing machinery of other people's lives proceeding with complete and generous indifference. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. A text from Ethan. Funding board approved the community expansion. We need to celebrate. Coffee tomorrow? She looked at the text. She looked up at the city, the buildings, the lights coming on in windows, the ordinary, specific beauty of a place that was, she understood, hers in a way she hadn't quite let herself claim yet. She typed back, yes, tomorrow. She put the phone in her pocket. She started walking. And 3 blocks behind her, through the glass of the Harrington Grand Bar, Roman DeLuca stood at the table they'd just shared and watched her go. Watched until she turned the corner and disappeared, watched the space where she'd been, and then sat back down alone in the bar light with his hands on the table and his jaw working and the specific expression of a man who has just, for the first time in his adult life, lost something he valued and not tried to stop it from leaving. Because he finally, at 41 years old, in a hotel bar on a Tuesday evening, understood the difference between holding on and deserving to. He picked up his phone. He did not call Marcus. He did not call Carver. He searched for something he had never in his life searched for, typed 3 words into a browser with the careful deliberateness of a man doing something that costs him something real, and sat there looking at the results on his screen while the bar went on around him and the city went on outside, and Serena Whitmore walked away into her own life without once looking back. The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday morning in early spring. Claire sent them over electronically, clean and complete, every attachment in order, every figure agreed upon, after 6 weeks of negotiation that had been, by the standards of these things, relatively quiet. Not easy. Nothing about it had been easy, but quiet. Roman's attorneys had stopped fighting the disclosure after the second round. The offshore holding company had been dissolved. The payments to her parents had been documented, acknowledged, folded into the settlement terms in a way that Claire described as legally elegant and Serena described as the minimum acknowledgement of a harm that didn't have a clean dollar value. The settlement was fair, more than fair, objectively. Roman had not fought her on the financials once she'd made clear she wasn't going to be managed out of what she was owed. She sat at her kitchen table on Mercer Street with the documents on her laptop screen and the early spring light coming through the window and her coffee going cold beside her. And she read through everything once, carefully, the way she'd read everything carefully since she'd started doing things for herself again. Then she called Claire. "It's right," she said. "I think so too. You can sign electronically. It goes to Roman's counsel today, then filing, then roughly 3 weeks for the court to process." "Okay." "Serena." Claire paused. "You did well. Through all of it." She looked at the signature line on the screen. "Thank you, Claire, for everything." She signed. She closed the laptop. She sat for a moment in the quiet of the apartment. Her apartment, with its fire escape plant and its brick wall window, and its cheap linoleum floor that she had come to love with the specific intensity of someone who'd earned the right to love it. And she felt the document move through the machinery of the legal system and away from her, carrying with it the formal structure of 6 years. And she let herself feel the full weight of that. Not performance, not management, just the real weight, held for a real minute, acknowledged. Then she got up, got her bag, and went to work. The community expansion program had its first full operational day on a Wednesday 3 weeks into spring, and Serena was in the field by 7:30 in the morning with a thermos of coffee and a folder of intake forms, and the particular focused energy of someone doing work that connects directly to something they believe in. The new site was in the Eastland neighborhood, a community center that had been underused for years and was now, after 6 months of Bright Horizons groundwork, relationship building, trust, the slow patient labor of showing up consistently, full of children on a Wednesday afternoon when children should have been somewhere safe and stimulated and weren't always. She watched a 9-year-old named Marcus, different Marcus, she thought, with a small internal acknowledgement of the coincidence, work through a reading exercise with a volunteer tutor, his tongue between his teeth in concentration, his whole body leaning toward the page, and something moved through her chest that was clean and uncomplicated and real. This was the thing. This was the actual thing. Ethan found her at the back of the room around 4 o'clock, the afternoon winding down, children collecting their things, and parents beginning to arrive in ones and twos. He had a coffee from the cart on the corner. He'd learned how she took it somewhere in the past months without making a thing of it, and he handed it to her and stood beside her watching the room empty. "Good day," he said. "Really good day. The intake numbers are ahead of projections." "I know, I saw." He was quiet for a moment. "You look different than you did when you first walked into my office." She looked at him. "Different how?" "Like you're in the right place." He said it simply, without decoration. "Like you know you're in the right place." She held the coffee with both hands and looked at the room. The empty chairs, the scattered materials, the crayon drawings that had already started accumulating on the wall here, the way they had at the main office. All that evidence of children who were here, who'd been reached, who had one more person in their corner than they'd had before. "I am," she said. He nodded once, and they stood there for another minute in the comfortable silence of two people who'd built enough shared context to not need to fill it, and then they went about the work of closing up. Her parents called in April. Her father first, a short, careful message left on her voicemail, his voice with the particular stiffness of a man who'd rehearsed what he was going to say and was delivering it from the script rather than himself. He said he wanted to talk. He said he hoped she was well. He said he was sorry. The word sitting in the message like an object placed carefully in a room, not yet natural, not yet earned, but present. She listened to it twice. She did not call back that day. She thought about what Marcus, Roman's Marcus, had said in the cafe on 9th Street. "I'm asking you to know the full picture." She'd been operating on the full picture for months now, and what the full picture had taught her was that people were capable of doing genuinely damaging things from genuinely complicated motivations, and that the complexity of the motivation did not cancel the damage, and that holding both of those things at the same time without collapsing one into the other was some of the hardest work a person could do. Her mother called the following week. This one was not from a script. She could hear that immediately, the unevenness of it, the places where her mother's voice caught and had to restart. She said she'd been going to a counselor. She said she'd been trying to understand what she'd done and why she'd done it, and she didn't have clean answers yet. She said she missed Serena. She said she was not asking for anything. She just needed Serena to know that she knew what she'd been part of, and she was sorry in a way that didn't have a bottom to it. Serena sat with that message for a long time. She called back on a Sunday afternoon. The conversation was 40 minutes long and hard and real, in a way their conversations had not been real in years, possibly ever. Her mother cried. Serena didn't, but not because she didn't feel it. She felt it fully, the whole compound grief of it, the specific wound of a betrayal that came from the people who were supposed to be the ground beneath you. She felt it and held it and spoke anyway, clearly, without the management she'd once applied to every difficult thing. She said what the payments had cost her. She said it specifically and completely, without softening it for her mother's comfort, because her mother's comfort was not the point of this conversation. She said that trust, once built over on that particular foundation, didn't simply restore because someone went to a counselor and left a voicemail. Her mother said she understood. "I need time," Serena said. "I know, and I need you to not push. If I come back to this, it's on my terms and my timeline." "Yes," her mother said. "Yes, okay." It wasn't resolution. She understood that clearly. It was an opening, a hairline fracture in a wall that had been solid and was now possibly beginning to be something else. She didn't know what it would become. She didn't need to know yet. She hung up and sat on her fire escape with the plant she'd put there in early spring, which was now, somewhat to her surprise, thriving, and she looked at the brick wall across the way and the small rectangle of sky visible above it, and she breathed the spring air and let the conversation settle into her without trying to resolve it into anything neat. Some things didn't resolve neat. That was fine. She was learning to be fine with that. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in late April. She knew the date because Claire had told her, and she'd written it in her planner in the same handwriting she used for everything else. Program meetings, site visits, coffee with Ethan. And when the day came, she went to work and did her job and came home and made dinner and sat at her kitchen table and felt the day be what it was. Not a triumph, not a collapse, just a day on which something formally ended that had actually ended months ago, in stages, in a series of small specific moments that had accumulated into an irreversible direction. She opened a bottle of wine she'd been keeping for the occasion. Not an expensive one, just a bottle she'd bought herself on a walk home one evening because she'd wanted it. and she poured a glass and sat on the fire escape with the plant, and watched the sky do what it did in late spring evenings, the light lasting longer now, the city below doing its evening thing. She thought about this ballroom at the Harrington Grand, the champagne that had gotten warm in her hand, the string quartet playing something melancholy that nobody was paying attention to, the couple she'd watched through the window swaying together, the woman's head on the man's shoulder. She thought about 4 words in the cold air of a balcony 42 floors up. She thought about a canvas duffel on a high shelf and a cash envelope in the back of a drawer, and the particular quality of her own hands, steady on the cab door in the gray hour before dawn. She thought, I knew, before I knew I knew. She thought, the person I was becoming was always there. She was just waiting for the exit. She drank her wine and watched the sky and let the evening be what it was. She ran into Roman in June. Not engineered, purely the city being what cities are, which is indifferent to the emotional logistics of the people moving through them. She was walking back from a site visit in the mid-district, cutting through the plaza near the Ellison building because it was faster, and he was coming out of the building's main entrance in a dark suit with a briefcase and 2 men she didn't recognize flanking him at a distance. They saw each other at about 15 feet. Both stopped. The 2 men with Roman took the social cue and moved off to one side with the practiced discretion of people in that particular profession. Roman crossed the remaining distance between them and stopped 2 feet away, and they stood in the June afternoon light in the plaza, with office workers and lunch crowds moving around them, and looked at each other. He looked different. She registered it immediately, the way you register something in a familiar face that is the same face but differently inhabited. He was in the same kind of suit, same good quality, same controlled presentation. But there was something in the area around his eyes that wasn't the same, a quality of being less barricaded, or maybe more accurately, the barricade was still there. It was just no longer invisible. Like he'd stopped pretending it wasn't there, and that small acknowledgement had changed his whole face. You look well, he said. So do you. She meant it. How's the consolidation? Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Closed. Last month. Without the stability display. Without it. He looked at her steadily. Turns out the old man respected the honesty of saying the situation is what it is more than he would have respected a performance. She nodded. That tracked, actually. The people who'd been in certain worlds long enough often had more respect for real things than people assumed. And the other faction? She asked it the way you ask about something you already know the answer to. Managed. Flat, neutral, the word doing its work. She didn't ask for detail, and he didn't offer it, and that was its own kind of acknowledgement of what she was and wasn't part of anymore. I'm seeing someone, she said. It was direct and deliberate, not to wound, but because she'd decided she wasn't going to manage his feelings about her life at the cost of her own honesty. Not anymore, not ever again. His jaw moved. Once, fractional, then settled. Good, he said. And the particular quality of it, the way he said it with the full weight of a man who meant it despite what it cost him, was the most honest thing she'd ever heard from him. Are you seeing the therapist? She asked, the corner of his mouth again. Every Thursday. And it's... He stopped. She watched him find the word with the same careful deliberateness she'd watched him use in the bar at the Harrington. It's hard. Every week it's hard. I go anyway. Good, she said, and meant it the same way he had. They stood in the June light for another moment. There was no hostility between them. That was the strange thing, the thing she hadn't been sure about until this moment. She'd expected to feel the residue of it, the scar tissue anger that comes from deep specific wounds. And she felt it, she could locate it, but it wasn't what was primary. What was primary was something quieter and stranger, something that felt like 2 people who had been through a significant thing together and had come out the other side changed, and were now standing in a plaza in June, looking at each other across the distance of everything that had happened. I don't regret meeting you, she said. It came out quieter than she'd intended, but accurate. I regret a lot of things about how it went, but not meeting you. He held her gaze for a long moment. I regret more than I can say, he said. Most of it about who I was in that house. With you. He paused. The therapist says I'm supposed to sit with that instead of manage it. Is that working? Ask me in a year. She almost smiled. He looked at her. One more time, the kind of look that contains a whole inventory. And then he said, Be happy, Serena. Not as a performance, not as the social close of a difficult exchange. Just 3 words, in his voice, carrying the specific weight of a man who understood exactly what he was giving up the right to. "You too," she said. She walked away. She didn't look back. Not because she was afraid to, not because it would undo her. She knew it wouldn't. She was solid in herself in a way she hadn't been at the Harrington Grand 14 months ago. Solid in a way that had been built piece by piece from the inside out over months of hard and real work. She didn't look back because forward was where everything that mattered to her now was located, and she had learned, at real cost, not to look away from the direction she was going. Ethan took her to the roof of a building he knew in the Westbrook neighborhood on a Friday evening in early summer. The roof of an old converted warehouse that a friend of his had access to, with a view of the city that went in every direction. He'd brought a blanket and takeout containers from the Thai place, and they sat on the blanket and watched the city in the long summer evening light while they ate. He told her about a grant they'd been awarded, federal, significant, enough to extend the community expansion into 2 additional neighborhoods by the following year. He talked about the kids at the Eastland site, the ones they'd been tracking since the beginning, the early numbers on reading level improvements that were, by the statistical standards of this work, genuinely striking. She listened and talked and ate, and the city spread out around them in every direction, and the light went from gold to amber to the particular soft gray of a summer evening that doesn't rush toward dark. At some point their conversation slowed naturally, the way conversations slow between people who don't need to fill every moment, and they sat in the easy quiet and watched the lights come on across the skyline. Building by building, window by window, all those separate illuminated lives. Ethan's hand found hers on the blanket between them. Not a move, not a declaration, just a hand, placed gently against hers, the warmth of it real and unhurried. She looked at his profile. The lived-in face, the quality of attention he brought to the city, the same way he brought it to everything, present, unperforming. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Okay." He turned to look at her. "I don't want to change anything about who you are. I know that sounds like something people say, but I mean it specifically." He held her gaze. "Everything you've built in the last year, the work, this," he gestured at her, at herself, at the whole specific ongoing project of her. "I don't want to be something that takes from that. I want to be something that sits beside it." She looked at him for a moment. She thought about being told, in various ways and by various structures of control, what her life should look like and who she should be inside it. She thought about the particular violence of managed diminishment, how it didn't announce itself, how it arrived as care and convenience, and finally as architecture you couldn't see from the inside. She thought about the canvas duffel on the high shelf. She thought about her own hands, steady. "I know you mean it," she said. "That's why I'm here." He turned back to the city. His hand stayed where it was. Hers stayed where it was. They sat on the roof until the city was fully lit beneath them, until the stars appeared in the narrow rectangle of sky above the skyline, until the evening settled into proper night, and they stayed in it without hurrying it anywhere, 2 people content to be exactly where they were for exactly as long as they were there. That same night, in the northern part of the city, Roman DeLuca came home to the 12,000-square-foot house behind its stone walls and its security gate and its professionally maintained grounds, and he went inside and poured 3 fingers of scotch and sat in the leather chair in his study and did not go through his phone. He sat. He'd been learning to sit, actually sit, without the phone, without the operational agenda, without the forward motion that had been his primary defense against his own interior for as long as he could remember. The therapist had given him this as an explicit instruction: sit. Not meditate, not process, not work through anything. Just sit in the house and feel what the house felt like and don't manage it. What the house felt like was large, not in the architectural sense. He'd always known it was large. That was why he'd built it. That was what it was supposed to signal. But large in a different sense. Large the way a space feels when it contains less than it was designed for. He'd lived in it alone for over a year now, and he was beginning to understand that the quality of silence he'd always thought of as order was in fact something else, was vacancy, specifically, the absence of another life running alongside his own. He thought about Serena's face in the plaza, not with the specific pain it had carried in the first months. That pain was still there. He'd been taught in 12 weeks of Thursday sessions to stop trying to take it apart and just let it be what it was. but it had changed texture. It had become something he could look at rather than something that required management. He thought about what she'd said. "I don't regret meeting you." He thought about who he'd been in that house with her, the specific daily accumulated ways he'd made her smaller, not from cruelty, which would have been simpler, but from fear, which was so much more expensive because it looked like nothing from the outside, felt like nothing he could name at the time, and cost everything in the end. He'd said this to the therapist on Thursday, approximately, and the therapist had asked, what would it have taken to do it differently? He'd sat with that for a long time. The honest answer, the one he'd gotten to eventually, after 3 weeks of circling it, was, I would have had to believe I was worth being known. Not worth respecting, not worth fearing, not worth allying with or managing or leveraging. Worth being known. And he hadn't believed that. He'd built an entire life around never having to find out whether it was true, and in the process had pushed away the one person who'd been trying for 6 years to find out with him. He sat in the leather chair and held that. He didn't try to resolve it into something useful. He'd been doing that his whole life, and the therapist had been gently and persistently dismantling the habit. He just held it, let it be the weight it was. Stayed in the chair until the scotch was finished and the house was fully dark outside the study windows, and the city beyond the wall made its nighttime sounds. He thought about what it meant to be worth knowing. He thought about the fact that he was 41 years old and asking this question seriously for the first time. He thought, better now than never. He thought, barely, but yes. Better now than never. He got up and went to bed. He turned out the light. He lay in the dark and felt the house around him. Large, quiet, still. And he didn't reach for the empty space beside him the way he had in the first months. He lay on his own side and breathed and felt the day settle through him, and thought about Thursday and about the question he hadn't answered yet that the therapist kept returning to. What do you want your life to look like from here? Not what he wanted to acquire. Not what he wanted to control or protect or consolidate. What did he want his life, the actual interior of it, the texture of a Tuesday evening, the quality of a conversation, the feeling of being known? What did he want it to look like? He didn't have the answer yet, but he was, for the first time, asking the question without immediately trying to manage it into something he could act on. And that small difference, the space between asking and managing, was, his therapist had suggested, where everything actually started. He fell asleep. On a Saturday in late summer, Serena walked to the Foundation's main office because she'd left her phone charger there the previous evening, and she wanted it before the weekend swallowed her. The office was empty. Good empty. Weekend empty. The productive quiet of a place that would be full again Monday. She found the charger at her desk, and she stood for a moment in the empty office and looked at the wall. The children's drawings had multiplied since the first day she'd walked in. They covered 3/4 of the available space now. The crayon suns, the lopsided houses, the figures holding hands, the occasional ambitious attempt at a dog or a cityscape, or something that might have been a rocket ship. Names written in the deliberate block letters of children who'd recently learned that letters were theirs to command. Deja, Marcus, Amara, Theo, Lily. She stood and looked at the wall. She thought about this ballroom at the Harrington Grand and the champagne and the string quartet and the 300 people in their expensive clothes performing the version of themselves they'd decided to present that evening. She thought about a balcony and 4 words and cold metal railing under her hands. She thought about the canvas duffel and the East Gate and a cab moving through a city that was waking up. She thought about all of it as the continuous thing it was. Not a story about a marriage, not a story about escape, but a story about a woman who had been disappearing by degrees and then, in a single night, had decided not to, and had spent the months afterward discovering what she was made of when no one was managing the answer. She was made of this, of these drawings and these names and this work, and the people she was learning to let close, and the person she was still, daily, becoming. She took a photo of the wall on her phone. She looked at it for a moment. She sent it to Nadia with no caption. Nadia responded in 30 seconds. A single emoji. A small flame. Serena smiled. She put the charger in her bag. She turned off the light. She went out into the Saturday, into the late summer city, into the ongoing, irreversible fact of her own life. And she walked, with the particular unhurried confidence of someone who knows where they're going and has chosen it completely, out into everything that was waiting for her, which was considerable, which was enough, which was, for the first time in a very long time, entirely and undeniably hers.